Hi, I'm Ed Jaffe, and welcome back to Jaffe Woodwinds. Today, we're going to have an interview with longtime friends of mine who service the music industry and woodwind players in specific in the most unique and helpful way. They are, in essence, the best friends you can have as woodwind players, and especially as woodwind doublers. Uh, I'm talking about Jonathan Watkins and Crystal Conklin, who are the owners and proprietors of Wright Music out here in Port Washington, New York, which is just outside the city on Long Island. And they service not only the New York metropolitan area, but really musicians throughout the country, and have been doing so for many years. And it's understood that we, as woodwind players, need to, constantly buy reeds and buy sheet music and get our instruments repaired and need guidance in this way. And these folks are really the best that I've ever encountered in my career. So I want you to meet Jonathan Watkins, Crystal Conklin, and we're here in Wright Music now in Port Washington, New York. And we're going to be talking about the retail music industry and all of the changes that have occurred in it, and all the things that you guys do to help musicians and help students who are looking to, learn about music. So, John, I met you probably 40 some odd years ago. You've had a long career in retail music industry, but both you and Crystal have a unique background in that you were both trained as performers, and you as a bassoonist, Crystal as a clarinetist, and have kept your training and your desire and love of music going even while you're doing this retail music industry part of it full time. And I think that helps us as musicians when we come to you, because you are musicians and you understand what we're going through, and it's such a unique experience because so much of the retail music industry is run by people who are not musicians. So with that as a background, let's talk about how you got into the retail music industry and your experience in that regard.
Well, while I was doing my master's degree back in quite a while ago, 1980 was my first venture into the retail music industry. I started working part-time while I was doing my master's degree in the city with a gentleman named Fred Weiner. So at that time, it was a mail order business. We had a one-page catalog, and the funny thing is, we were selling buffet clarinets for $6.99.
I'll take one.
But anyway, so what happened was I started doing that part-time, and that was for a couple of years while I was finishing my degree. And then I was offered a position to try to expand on. And I did. I was very fortunate because of working with phenomenal musicians and answering phones and talking to the different musicians like Ed and many other players. And that gave me, even though I was a bassoonist, I gained an awful lot of knowledge about clarinet mouthpieces, ligatures, saxophone mouthpieces and setups. So I really enjoyed working with professional musicians, and it really gave me a unique opportunity to help people because I had this plethora of people that I was getting this wonderful information and education from, and it was a lot of fun to do. So I started doing that in 1980. Basically was there for a while, left there, went to work for Sam Ash Music, managed their store in Manhattan for about a year, and then became the band and orchestral instrument buyer for the Sam Ash chain, which I've found fascinating and a great job. But then there was an opportunity where Woodwind and Brasswind, who a lot of us know, wanted to open up a store in Manhattan. And I found it intriguing. I found it going back to the old days of one place you can go and buy everything. Get your clarinet reeds, your oboe cane, and your trumpet mouthpiece. It was just all in one. And it was a beautiful, beautiful store. I know Ed was there
It
many
was
times.
it was unbelievable. It was unique.
It
You
was
know,
unique. We had concerts and everything there. We had the New York Sax Quartet. I mean, we can go on. We had it was just amazing. Canadian brass flew in to perform there because we had a stage in the store. So it was a unique place. And unfortunately, the owner had unrealistic uh, thoughts about what the store should be doing financially. So it lasted 3 years and then was closed. Then I went from there and started working on, actually, by Lincoln Center. Many of you might know the music store. It was a location that really started off selling only sheet music. That's what their background was. Phil Unger, who fine flute repairman and flute music store owner, he was working there also. And what ended up happening was I was there for maybe 6 to 8 months. Things did not go well in the industry. And I found out that a music store in Port Washington was for sale through a friend of mine. And the person who owned the store I knew because he was a bassoonist. And he also studied with William Polisi, whom I studied with. So we started talking about it in, I guess it was maybe June of 2003. And I officially bought the store at the end of August of 2003. And that's where I've been ever since.
right. And so you've been out here for 22 years now. This is the second location in Port Washington, and it's you own the building and really cater to not only woodwinds but also brass and strings, and it's a full-fledged retail store. And in doing so, when you started, obviously you can't handle this alone. So how did this bring you to Crystal? Because that's a wonderful story, I think.
It really is a wonderful story. And so what ended up happening was I bought the store at the end of August. So I'm like, I know I'm gonna need help. So I made a call to a friend of mine who teaches clarinet at Hofstra, Lori Friedman. So I called Lori up and I said, Lori, I just bought the store in Port Washington from Bernie Wasser. I said, I'm going to need help. She says, okay, and hangs up the phone. So I get a couple people coming in, and so there was this one young man that came in, and it was fine. And then Crystal came in and interviewed. And the funny part about Crystal coming was when I told Lori I needed help, and Crystal was studying with Lori at the time, Lori went to Crystal specifically and said, a friend of mine just bought a music store in Port Washington, and you're going to go work for him. And the story goes, as I found out later from Crystal, is that I didn't know I was looking for a job. So that was in September of 2003.
Wow.
And Crystal and I have been together ever since.
Wow. And now, Crystal, your teacher comes to you and tells you, I have a job for you, you're going to do this. What were you doing in college at the time? You were an undergraduate, I imagine, at that time. And what was your thought as far as having a career in music? Where was your head geared at that time?
Yeah, so I was pursuing my degree in music education, and I definitely wasn't looking for a job, but Jonathan always likes to say he almost didn't hire me because I could only do Saturdays because I was a full-time student. I was performing a ton in the organization, so I was doing my 4 years undergrad for music education, which I did have, and Jonathan also likes to always remind me that he told me those entire 4 years, don't get into retail. This is not the way to go. This is not a future. This is not where you want to be. So that was it. We were doing a lot of work together to kind of build the store. There were a lot of policies and procedures that I was helping develop because it was a store that we were transitioning from, an old school brick and mortar to serving more what Jonathan's vision of, what a music store should be. So, kind of in doing that, I went off to start teaching, and because I was still relied on for some of the policies and procedures, I was still coming in on Saturdays, so I would teach during the week, and then I would come in on the weekends and do those things. And I found out I really was not cut out for classroom management. It just was not where I wanted to be. So during that time, we were getting larger, and Jonathan needed to kind of be further away from doing the counter stuff, and so that opened us up to a position of me coming to work full time. And that kind of first year was a lot of growing for us, really figuring out what that was going to be and developing out that role. But I mean, like many people that end up in retail, I feel like it was a journey I didn't expect to be on, but I mean, 22 years later, I don't regret it.
Right. And I think this is an important message to bring out, especially for young students and students who are music majors in college or just getting out of college wondering, where is it that I'm going to earn a living? And one thing I used to stress to the students I had at the university when I was teaching full time is that a career is 40 years plus of earnings. And when you're looking at coming out of school and getting a job, and maybe you land a job, and maybe it's a gig on a cruise ship, or it's a gig playing a show. In a rare instance, that happens, or going on tour with a rock band, or doing something performing wise. I still tell them, or did tell them, you have 40 years that you have to think about. Is this the type of gig that's going to lead to a 40-year career? Because that's really the working scenario. Till you get to around 65, between 25 and 65, give or take a few years on either side, that's the career you have to look at. And there's very few opportunities in the industry, performing-wise, that one could really say, yeah, I'm going to do this for 40 years, or I know it's going to be there. The music industry is volatile, as we know. So coming to something, working in retail music industry, and now 22 years later, you're still growing and your reputation is great throughout the industry. That's not something to sneer at. So I think many young students watching this should consider alternate possibilities for having that 40-year career. And the great thing is you're both still playing. And I think that has to be stressed. It doesn't mean you're not going to play your instruments. It just means that maybe the bulk of your money and your benefits come through another vehicle still related to the music industry. So I think that's wonderful. Just briefly, let's talk about what you're both doing playing-wise or have done to sort of expand upon that.
Well, I mean, even though when I was first getting into the business, I was still doing a lot of pickup dates and things of that nature. Always enjoyed playing so much, and it was just part of my life. So yeah, I would do these pickup gigs when they came on board. For a little while there, I was in the American Philharmonic. Some people might remember it. It was a short-lived orchestra. It was about 2 years, and I was playing second bassoon in the orchestra, and that was for about 2 years. And then, unfortunately, the orchestra folded. But it was a great time because we were playing a concert a month at Avery Fisher, at the time. And which also led to other things. I was in Pandean Wind Players. It was a woodwind quintet that we ended up adding strings to, and we did concerts. We did Lincoln Center, library. We did all of that stuff. And then as things kept going, I never wanted to leave playing because that was always my first love, and that was important because in business, people realized, or at least one of my very good friends had said to me, he said that he felt that I was always a musician first and a businessman second.
Yes.
So when dealing with musicians, that's a really important thing to have, is the trust of a player. So
100%.
again, so that understanding and and the people coming into the store knowing that I'm still playing gave a lot of validity to what I was trying to accomplish.
And you still play today, and you teach
Yes.
privately, and well, so again, the idea that, well, if I'm not earning my living or the bulk of my living full time, I'm not a musician. That's not the case, especially in today's world where playing opportunities are fewer than they were 20 years ago, and a lot fewer than they were 40 years ago.
Right.
It just That's where things have evolved. Crystal, regarding your playing, what are you doing these days, and what are you involved with?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit I think of being able to do retail during the day is allowing me to continue to have relationships both with musicians that I know, but meeting musicians that I don't. So I'm lucky enough to be able to play in a number of community organizations through people that I know who are like, oh, we need more clarinet players. I'm lucky enough to be able to still privately teach because you do meet those people here. And then for me, I get to play with a bunch of German beer bands now, which my husband very much enjoys supporting me when I'm playing those beer gigs. That's all down for him. But no, I still get calls from colleagues who know that I'm here, but it also allows us to kind of form those relationships. I mean, for many of the people that we've employed over the years, one of the real reasons this worked out for them was that they could come here and have a dependable paycheck, a solid paycheck, but then they could still go gig on the weekends, and they would form relationships here with people, but it also allowed them to really continue to do what they wanted to do, but to do it a little bit more stably.
You alluded to something about over the years things have grown here. Can you talk about what your store and your stores over the years have provided? Obviously, we can see some of the books and sheet music in the back, and I've mentioned woodwinds, but you're a full flight retail music store. So just for those who might not really understand the full nature of what retail music is, can you explain all the things you guys do, which is numerous?
Well, it's we being a full service music store. We obviously did not just focus on woodwinds. We covered brass. We rent all instruments, so everything from strings to brass to woodwinds.
Can you even talk? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned to me a few minutes ago just the amount of instruments you rent. I mean, I certainly didn't get the idea of how much. When you just told me the amount of string instruments you rent, I was kind of astonished.
It's funny when I first bought the store, the rental amount at that time that the Wassers were doing was about 500 to 600 instruments a year. So now basically we're averaging between 14 and 1500, and that still encompasses both strings, woodwinds, and brass.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts, and so and we also are very, very careful about not over extending ourselves in terms of instruments. The instruments we rent are because we rent because we're happy with them. We do not, we'll say we've run out of instruments because we don't like what we have left and they need to have more work done on them. So that's a part of it. We also had the string business, I mean the sheet music business, but in the first location we had lessons. So just to backtrack a little bit, with what the previous owners had with the music lessons in the basement, I knew that the immediate overhead, my mortgage, if you will, was being covered by the amount of lessons that were being done in the basement. And in that basement at one time, it we had as many as 22 teachers,
Wow.
and we had some pretty prominent teachers.
Right. And a few of friends and I know of
Yes.
course, that.
And that was amazing. I knew them before I even bought the store. So that was really cool for me because I got to see old friends on top of it all, you know. So, and so that was important at the time. And that another part of this, we also did school business. So I had a repairman who was actually he had retired from Con Selmer. He actually owned his own music store many years ago, known as Amato Music out east. So Jimmy came to work for me and did some repair work for me and actually taught another gentleman that I brought on board some repair work. So we were doing school repair work, which at that time was another way to bring in income. Unfortunately, that business has deteriorated quite a bit and become very problematic. So that's not something we do much anymore, other than maintaining our rental inventory and instruments that we sell, that we cover. But we don't actually actively go out to school districts to solicit musical instrument repair anymore.
Right. But a part of your business, obviously, the majority of the rentals do go to schools.
Yes.
Right. And so here in Long Island, which has sort of gotten a big history of supporting music throughout many districts, how many districts or how many schools do you guys actually work with and supply instruments to over the year?
Oh, geez. So school business is a large driving force, and working with the young musicians has been a giant driving force for us. This year alone, we probably have worked with 20 to 30 different districts, and that's pretty average for us.
Districts?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're very lucky. Most of our rental business is over the counter. We don't do large scale rental, as Jonathan said, just because the quality control was a little bit more difficult for us to do. Right. A lot of what we do here to support school districts is instrument sales. We do accessory sales, sheet music sales, of course, but we also work a lot with teachers who are recommending their students to us for buying their own instruments and kind of putting their trust in what we do here and those kind of consulting things. So I would say between 20 to 30 districts on a year is about average for us.
And there are many schools in each district, so it's
Yes.
so that's a huge amount of work. Wow. But that's something that full service music retail stores traditionally did, and
Yep.
we find fewer of them today. So you're in a sort of a more unique position now than, let's say, 40 years ago would have been. You also alluded to things where you go out, and I experienced that when I was at the university. You guys came out numerous times, and well, we had specialty woodwind days, and you did your presentation. Can you talk about your outreach endeavors, because they're numerous?
They are numerous, and we had a lot of fun. We did work very hard, but I will tell you, from everything from doing events at Steinway Hall, when it was Steinway Hall, and we had a Selmer Day more than once, where Jerome Selmer would come in from Paris, and Stanley Drucker was. I mean, we can go on and on. And it was so much fun because we were surrounded by all these wonderful players, and we were there exhibiting instruments that people need and want. So we had a lot of fun with that. Another thing that we got involved in was Padelson's Music House. So for those of us who are my age and maybe younger, but Padelson's Music House, which was on 56th Street, was where all of us went for our music.
And by the way, just to interrupt, it was directly behind Carnegie Hall. So every visiting orchestra was in Padelson's whenever they played at Carnegie Hall.
So what happened was, especially when I was going to Mannes College of Music, I lived there. I got all my, you went upstairs to their second floor, and I got, the first bassoon part to the Rite of Spring, or I got the first, second, and contrabassoon part to Beethoven 9, because they had it. It was a place you could go and just browse and buy the parts. So it was so cool. So years later, my insurance agent said, I want to introduce you to somebody. They have a music place in Manhattan. And I said, yeah, what's the name of it? And he said, it's called Padelson's Music House. I said, you're kidding me. So Marcia Padelson, who was a New York City school teacher, cellist, Marcia's husband had passed away suddenly, and she was left with this music store that to me is an icon in the industry, an icon in New York City. So we started working to try to get the store busy again, because it had tailed off, because obviously the internet, people would buy music on the internet. So we wanted to make this icon, this really big thing that was important to us, succeed. So Crystal and I started having events that we did at Padelson's. And it was a lot of fun. I didn't even realize, but the funny thing is, when you went up to the second floor in Padelson's, you would make a little bit of a U-turn and go into a hallway, and that hallway took you to Joseph Padelson's apartment. That's where he lived. So, of which a lot of people didn't know about. Certainly I didn't. So Crystal and I organized this thing where we started with, basically the first thing we did was Clarinet Day. And we brought in, I don't know, 20, 30 professional clarinets. And we set up, and we did it usually maybe over 2 days.
Yeah, normally 2 days.
Yeah. So we'd be huffling, all these clarinets up there, and we'd have every major player in New York City coming there trying clarinet.
And it was a lot of fun.
It was fun. It was everybody seeing each other.
Right.
And it was trying to create that vibe for people to come back to Padelson's.
Yes.
That was what was so cool about it too, because it meant something to us.
Yeah.
And we did it for, I'm not sure how long, a couple of years, 2, 3 years.
2 or 3 years. We did a couple different times there. It was a good time.
Yeah, and we had a lot of fun with it, and it just wasn't meant to be. And from my understanding, and I'm not sure of all, obviously privy to all the details, but I think it was better for Marcia to sell the facility than to try to rebuild it.
Right.
Especially with the internet and the amount of energy it would take to redo everything.
Right.
So basically, I know that she had sold the building, and then later on they tore it down, which kind of broke my heart.
Yeah.
But they did, and that's life.
Right. But you also have done, in addition to these type of outreach things in the commercial world, you might say, you also did a lot, and you still do a lot of university outreach programs, as well as state conferences and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about those aspects of the retail music industry? Because those are things that we don't think about when we think about having a music store in our town, that they not only service people coming in who need equipment or need repairs, but these are people who also reach out to universities and go to state conferences and competitions and help out in that regard, and give a perspective to students that they might not otherwise have.
Well, I'm going to have Crystal finish this up, but so we're going to the NYSSMA conference. It's in Rochester, New York.
And just tell people what NYSSMA is.
Okay, so NYSSMA, New York State School Music Association. So it's a meeting place where schools from all over the state send students. It's a competition to be able to play in these orchestras or sing in the choruses and everything like that. They all get to come. They bring their parents come up there, and this is statewide. So you have people from Queens, and you have people from Hunter, New York, all there, and they're meeting each other and performing with each other. And so a lot of manufacturers found that this has been going on for years. So manufacturers would come up there and exhibit. They would bring instruments to show to the students. They brought sheet music. You had some of the biggest sheet music dealers. I can't even imagine how much how much weight their music was. But they had a big area to show all the different types of music, all the solos that the students would need. The students would bring their parents in. They would have teachers up there, and they'd bring them. So you had this huge room, and I don't know how many what they call booths, but a lot. And it would be nonstop from like Friday. It would start at Friday morning and go through till Saturday afternoon, and it was could be very intense. It was an awful lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. And so the first year I'd gone up a couple times. I didn't exhibit. I just wanted to see what was going on. I'd been to NISMA before when it used to be held at a hotel called the Concord in Lower New York, which is only a 2-hour drive from Long Island. A little easier for me to get to. But what ended up happening was I started saying, we're going to go up to NISMA. So I went to Crystal. I said, we're going to go up, let's exhibit. So we went up, and our first time together going up, we shared a booth with Rob Poland, who was working for D'Addario at the time. So we shared a booth with D'Addario. So we were there, we were doing our thing. After that very first day, that first trip, Crystal looks at me and she says, next year, I want a double booth. I said, what? She said, and I'll let you explain the rest.
I mean, it's a representation of the store whenever we go out to do these things. So Jonathan's right, for the NISMA conference. It's the largest one that we do, and so we bring as much as we can to support, which cannot be done from something the size of a bathroom. But
Right.
for the university ones, the things that you're talking about, I mean, a lot of that is really important as a music retailer to go out, because you are getting you're getting FaceTime in a more comfortable environment, which does not feel as much of a sales environment,
Right.
where students and parents feel like they can ask more questions and explore more things. And I think
Right.
that's what's kind of important about that.
Right. It just builds your reputation in a more hands-on approach, rather than just seeing it advertised online. For people who may not live in the town, who live 30 miles away, 40 miles away, 50 miles away, they can actually meet you and see you, and then feel comfortable in that regard. Whether it's ordering reeds or getting information about equipment they need, or even saying, okay, I need to purchase a clarinet, I need to purchase a flute. What do you have and what do you recommend? Here's how much money I have to work with. And that's important too, because the price of instruments today varies tremendously. For the pros, buying a brand new buffet clarinet, or a Selmer saxophone, or a Yana Kasawa saxophone, or a Haynes, or let's talk Powell flute, Miramatsu flute. These are big expenditures today. We're talking about anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $12,000. Now, a student, a serious student, family, middle-class family, not going to have that kind of money, and at least, especially for someone who's not sure they're going into music as a major or even as a profession, there's a huge variance. Can you talk about what's happened with the nature of instruments, the pricing of them, and of course where they're being built that influences a lot of this pricing? And maybe a lot of people aren't quite aware of that.
Well, I'm gonna let Crystal speak to a lot of that. But what ended up happening is that the cost of the instruments keep going up, and we have to, and one of the things that Crystal and I have been really focusing on lately is who we really are as a music store in relationship to all of this. Yes, there was the time when we were doing these summer clarinet days. Yes, we did other clinics, and we would have a lot of professional instruments. Nowadays, it's very difficult to be able to afford to have that kind of selection, because to sell one clarinet, you may need to have a dozen in stock. That formula doesn't work. It doesn't work anymore.
Well, explain, because you have to really commit to those instruments initially just to have them in stock.
That's right. I will give you a perfect example of a good thing and then something that you're always flying by the seat of your pants. So at times, Crystal's actually gone out more than once to Conn-Selmer. She's also gone to a buffet and handpicked instruments.
Yes.
So she has flown there, handpicked instruments for the store.
And I have one of them in my possession from a number of years ago, where if I remember, you went through about 100 buffet clarinets, and I
Yeah.
picked
It was
out,
a long 2 days.
and I picked out two, one for myself and one for my friend Tom Rainier in California, and both have been magnificent.
Well, and there was another thing where our connections with professionals. So one time, John Manassi went down to Buffet and literally picked out in Florida, where their headquarters was, picked out like 30 clarinets. And he said, Jonathan, I've got 15 of them sold for you already, but I picked out 30 clarinets. So I said, okay. So I bought 30 clarinets because I knew half of them were gone. Now I would never be able to do that because the turnover is nowhere near what it used to be.
Right.
And that's something that we learned as time went on. To sell a professional bass clarinet, you can't have one.
Right.
Got to have two.
Right.
And the markup is not conducive to having more than one in stock.
Right. Right. So for a smaller retail music store that's full stock, you're basically, the bulk of the instruments you're selling are geared toward the student or the semi-professional, those who are not full-time professionals.
Correct.
We've seen more of an emergence, I think, in the past 10 to 15 years of more boutique style pro shops. You're seeing, a lot of the fact that the overhead of stocking those 5 bass clarinets that you really do need to try if you're going to buy a pro bass clarinet.
Right.
Full line retailers, they're not doing that as much anymore because it's physically impossible. I can't stock 5 bass clarinets and then 5 pro tenor saxophones and 5 pro altos. It would kill us.
Right. Can you explain what that terminology is, boutique?
Sure.
Shop
So
is?
boutique shops these days are going to be shops that you're going to find that are going to be very, very specialized. There's one in Brooklyn that specifically does bass clarinets. They have a really, when you go to work with them, you're going to get that really intense experience of only discussing that instrument. And when you're talking about spending $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, in all honesty, that really is where you want to go. Or there's a wonderful flute shop in Manhattan that does the same thing. They'll still sell a student style because meeting students when they're younger will help them transition into their adult flutes. But when you're really moving into that, you're going to go to these shops and you're not going to see a variety of books or a variety of stands on the wall. It's not what they're here to do. They're here really to focus on your journey of finding your perfect instrument because of the amount of money you're going to be laying out for that.
Right. So for beginners, intermediate students, and so forth, that's really where the bulk of your sales
Yes.
of instruments are going. And let's talk about, let's just say, well, let's go through some of the basic woodwind instruments, since we're a woodwind site. Flutes. What is the variance for beginner flutes, price-wise to intermediate, roughly, in rough terms?
Yeah. So these days, brand name closed hole kind of flute, your starter flute, which your 4th or 5th grader is going to use. When a parent is buying that new, they're looking these days at laying out between $500 to $800 for most of the brand names that we know. And so you do see a lot of that still being in rental. We've actually seen a larger drop off in things like closed hole flute sales because of that, because the student's going to maybe rent and then buy when they get to intermediate. Intermediate flute, as we all know, of course, that's going to be based on the amount of silver that's in the instrument, so that'll range a lot. But kind of our first step in, most families are in that investment range of between 1,000 to 1,500. And then once we start adding silver to the instrument, that's going to go up exponentially from there.
Right.
So when we're talking about an 8th grader who needs to have an instrument, a lot of what we do here is consulting with families. We kind of have to have those conversations of, what is a student's intention? What are they going to be using this for? And then what is a family's budget? And how do we marry those things
Right.
together?
And I want to stop you here because this is the stuff that you can't get online, that you can't get by just looking online. Oh, what are the prices of these flutes? Oh, let me get this $200 flute made in China, which of course today we're not going to be seeing anymore. But yeah. Those are the flutes. That's when you have problems. You buy the cheapest flute and you'll find it breaking down within the first month, and then where do you go? And then you realize it doesn't hold up after the first year. Then you have to buy again. So having a direct relationship to the local music retailer and to people who are specialized in woodwinds as you are is such an advantage. I mean, there's no way to replicate that online. And so when one says, well, we can get all this stuff online, why do we need a local music retailer? That's it, right then and there. Having that direct connection and explaining what the different instruments offer. Sometimes a student might be too small, let's say, to play an open hole flute, or not big enough to play a tenor sax, so maybe they should start on alto sax. Or the clarinet, is a little weighty for them, so let's get one with a strap so we can accommodate that's built for that. I mean, so there's so many variables. It's not just buying an instrument and for this amount of money, it's buying the right instrument for the young student at the right time. And that's one of the reasons you guys are so valuable to a community. This is something you just will not get online. And remember, we have spoken about instruments breaking down that have been produced overseas with non-union labor and are cheap, and they come in and you should explain it, because I remember when you told me, I was aghast about these instruments just falling apart immediately.
It's been a real drag to deal with, because parents do buy the things online, and they're just totally not repairable. So it's very difficult to tell a parent, well, this instrument that you just paid money for is now done. It's not repairable. So, and the things that we would see, simple things that could be fixed easily, are not, because they're all it's cheaper labor, it's cheaper materials, and they just want to get the stuff out as fast as possible. The interesting thing that that Crystal and I just learned over the last year with a gentleman that we know very well, is that though China's been making instruments for a long time, what's happening now is those people that have been, in the industry for 20 and 30 years, they're retiring. Their sons and daughters have no desire to go into the industry. So now you're going to start seeing those countries, they're not going to have the workers to make the instruments anymore. And, so yeah, there's China, you've got Taiwan, you've got Vietnam, so you have, of course, Japan, but you have all of these things going on, and there's very little support. So when you buy this instrument that comes in at a very inexpensive price, it's really, the best word to describe it is disposable.
Right. Yeah. And so again, looking at the bigger picture, I guess it goes back to the old axiom: you get what you pay for. And because an instrument is cheaper, doesn't necessarily mean it can't be a good instrument, but at a certain level, it's not. I mean, when we get to maybe the difference between top-level professional instruments, and there's $1,000 difference or a $1,500 difference between a $10,000 instrument and one that's $8,500, and maybe the $8,500 one plays as well or better. That's possible at that level, but not at the base level. and not at the intermediate level. You really do get what you pay for. And what you pay for is also the longevity. It's like buying a car. If you're going to buy a car, you don't want it to be breaking down every couple of months and having to be in the shop. You just want to do your normal repairs, grease and oil change, and when it's necessary, some, 40,000 miles, whatever, you do your necessary repairs. Same thing with an instrument. You don't want to have to be going into a repair shop every month or 2 months because things aren't working. The pads are falling out, the posts are coming off the body. So it's really like that. Now, this leads into a discussion of the people who do repair work, which is another very interesting subject. Can you talk about what's happened to repair technicians over the, past several decades?
I think it's not it's not uncommon knowledge. I think even as professional musicians, we see it, how often you have to kind of make phone calls and not get calls back, or how hard it is to book a repair appointment. So I don't think this is uncommon to say that these days that is a part of the industry that is really hurting, for the amount of people that are kind of going into that field. I think it's not something that's forgotten. I think it maybe is more something that we all took for granted. There was always someone who was going to be there to fix our instruments. We bought good instruments, and now there's going to be somebody to service them for us. So as a full-line music store, ideally we would love, always to have 2 full-time musicians to support the things that we do. Or 2 full-time technicians to support the rentals that we do, the instruments that we sell, and then other community members that have their own instruments. And I can say fully the interview process to kind of have that maintained is difficult. We're meeting a lot of people these days that really love the idea of doing instrument repair, but it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of kind of making your way through the industry. It's still that old school idea of really spending the time with the masters to learn bench side. The diagnostics on it take a long time to learn. So we've been very lucky that there have been a number of colleges, now that are starting those programs. That is a great field for people to start looking into. It's a field that very much needs more people getting into this. And that's just kind of step one. You kind of graduate these colleges and that educational journey continues. It's more kind of the journey of a plumber and electrician. You're getting your knowledge, but then you're working with a master for a number of years until you can kind of move through that. So
Right.
both for us as a music shop, but we're also hearing it the same from our manufacturing partners. They are having kind of the same problems on their lines. You used to go to places like the Bach facility, and it was, a giant moving beast all of the time with the number of people that they had there. And ourselves included, and some other colleagues have been out there recently and got to see in person, like, it isn't as robust as it used to be, and that's mostly just the number of people that are missing from that side of the industry now.
Right, and as you said, it's not only in the retail stores where we're finding shortages of repair people, but also the manufacturers. I know for absolute certainty, Yamaha in Japan is short on those type of people, and yet the important thing to recognize, when I mentioned earlier in the interview introduction, in essence, that a career in music you have to look at a 40-year span. Well, this is one of the few areas one can say, if one is really good as a repair technician, you will have a 40-year career. And we're talking about a 5-day-a-week type of job, and people who become really proficient end up doing sometimes on their own. They move out onto their own and can dictate their lifestyle. I mean, I as a woodwind player in New York, have had the wonderful experience of meeting some of the greatest repair technicians, and many of them who became dear friends. I mean, my first repair technician was Nick Engelman, who was the great technician up at Links and Longs for decades, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Carl Sawicki, who recently passed, who was a magnificent artist. Herb Kleeman, another dear friend who passed a number of years ago, who worked at Ponte's Music originally before moving out on his own. And just to give you a little example, when I became more aware of the music industry and really set my sights on being a professional as a teenager, in the 1970s in Ponte Music, actually in the late 60s even, in Ponte Music, there were always 3 repairmen working back to back simultaneously. There was that much work. All of them were wonderful. Herb Kleeman, I think Rod Baltimore was one. Shelley Marcus, was that Shelley's
think
last?
so.
Shelley, all three of them sitting there working back to back 5-6 days a week. And all of them went out on their own eventually and were successful. There was that much work. There's not as much work as that today, but there's still, with the amount of schools having music programs, in addition to the professionals, there's a need for quality repairmen. And in the woodwind field, we need people. And I'm going to put on the text accompanying this video a listing of the schools and the degrees that one can go to throughout this country. They're not that many. They're maybe about 7 or 8 in total that offer varying degrees of competency for woodwind repair. But like Crystal said, after that time, it's just like as a professional player. You still have to apprentice. You still have to pay your dues a little bit. But the point is, there is an opening. There's a field that is needed to be filled now. And it's mystifying to me why there aren't more people, young people, moving in that direction. And again, like you said, both of you are examples. You can still play your instruments. You can do stuff on weekends. You can do gigs. It's not like you're abandoning your performing. You're just adding a level of knowledge and certainty to your lifestyle that really is enviable.
Without a doubt.
So that's certainly something
Well, and I
to
think
be
we
considered.
can confidently say it's not. It's a field right now that needs so much growth that you really can approach almost any music store in any part of the country and set a more flexible schedule if you have these skills, if you're willing to learn these skills, if you're willing to work, in these departments with these master technicians. These are, this is a role that really needs to be filled, and you will find many shop owners and many manufacturers that are really willing to talk about what your goal is as a musician and how they can help you be there as well as doing repair work. So it really is a part of the field that is very open right now for people that can learn the skill and have the skill.
And it's not geographically zoned in one area.
Right.
We're here.
Right.
We're a member of a conglomerate of independent music store owners, and the thing is that everybody's having the same problem.
Yep.
They cannot get repair people, and if they get the repair person, they're not trained to where they need to be, and they might think they are.
Right.
Unfortunately, so there's a definitely issue to the point to where NAM, National Association of Music Merchants, is now making this a priority at their convention. This just started this past year when Crystal and I were out in California, that the NAM organization is going to be pushing this somewhat kind of a plan to advertise the musical instrument repair industry because there is such a need.
That's incredible. And one little thing needs to be mentioned, that if let's say you're a woodwind major, that you might end up being a wonderful string repair person, or if you're a brass player, doesn't mean you couldn't be a wonderful woodwind repair technician. In fact, my woodwind repair technician, the person that Jonathan really brought over to this country, Tomoji Hirakata, who's up at Yamaha for many years now, was a brass player in Japan. We're recruited by Yamaha, was working on brass instruments as well as woodwind instruments at your store, at the Woodwind Brasswind, and now has become the woodwind repair technician in New York City, doing really all clarinets, flutes, saxophones at the highest level. And yet he was someone who was a brass player who loved jazz and wanted to be a jazz player. And he had this incredible ability to concentrate and focus, as well as great hands, and here's the other thing, a personality to work with people and a desire, because that's something we sometimes don't mention, that you have to like people and you have to create an environment when people come into your store or come into work with you as a repair technician. And there are some people I've met over the years as technicians or music stores where you just want to walk right out because they don't have the personality, they don't have the inner resources to make that a welcoming environment.
Oh yeah, without a
So,
doubt.
yeah. Would you just briefly tell the story of how Tomoji Hirakata came here? Because I think this is also speaks to how to run a business. And you were opening the Woodwind Brasswind store, and you needed a technician.
Yep. So what ended up happening was when Lori Orr and I were approached and were going to be the two people in charge of the Woodwind and Brasswind location, we knew the importance of having an instrument repair tech. So what ended up happening was it was quite interesting about certain people who called us, who said, "Oh, hey, well, they were interested." The word got around in New York very quickly, and then even a couple manufacturers told me who they didn't want to see in our shop. Which I thought was interesting as well. So what ended up happening was a gentleman that did brass repair work in the city, and Tomoji was doing engraving. He was a master engraver. So he would do all of these things, whether it was a trumpet or a saxophone, it didn't matter. So the people who might know the Brass Lab, so he was recommended to us. So
Now, he was living in Japan at the time.
or he hadn't quite moved to the States
Right,
yet,
right.
So what ended up happening was, so he came in, so we interviewed him, and so we decided I got, Lori and I got two different friends. One gave her a flute, professional flute. Another gentleman gave us a professional R13. We gave him the instruments. We told those people, this guy's talented, but we want to test the work out. So we gave him the instruments, and the instruments came back, and the clarinetist, in his inimitable style, looked at me and said, "Who the heck did this?" He said, "Man, this is amazing." And so this is Hans Minnig work, I mean, he was going
I've got
off.
to ask you, was that Dave Weber?
No, no,
Okay, because
no.
that sounds like Dave.
No, but it was,
Okay.
and then the flute player was a professional pearl flute. They both loved it. So we figured, okay, so how we were negotiating about how to pay him. And it was really very interesting because I remember very fondly about all of this is that his English wasn't great at the time, but I was amazed because the paperwork that he had to fill out for the job, he would insert into his computer. It would print out in Japanese. He would fill it out in Japanese, put it back into the computer, and it would come back in English. I was like, okay, we know this guy's on it. And the funny thing was, there were so many musicians that were calling Laurie and I, well, you got to get this guy to do repair work, and you got to get this person to do repair work. And it was really funny. And I said to Laurie, I said, you know what? We got to get somebody nobody knows. Because if we get a repair person and people know, okay, so you're going to get the person that likes him, and the people that don't like him are never going to come in and get repair work done there.
True.
So we said, let's get somebody nobody knows. And as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah, and 25 some odd years later, he's a master repair person and one of the nicest people you could have, a dear friend. And
Very much
but that's an example of the fact that if one has the right attitude and skill, you have to be good with the hands, clearly, and you have to want to do it. The world is your oyster, so to speak.
Very much so. Very much so.
What for those who are in college or looking to go into college, what courses, besides being a music performance major, what courses would you encourage those to do to give them the possibility of expanding their work possibilities when they graduate? What courses besides the typical music performance or music education courses would you encourage that would allow them perhaps to move into a retail music industry
Well, we were
scenario?
just talking about that.
I think music retail is large. So we have what we do here, right? So that's and backgrounds in music education is fantastic for that. Backgrounds in music performance is fantastic with that. Just because it's a lot of being personable, as you say, like you have to actually want to talk to the person that you're talking to. We are lucky enough to have a lot of really good manufacturer reps, which is an interesting journey for them as well, which is a whole side of the industry that many people don't talk about. And a lot of them are still performing musicians. We just had dinner the other evening with two fine people who are active performers when they're home, and a lot of their travel, a lot of what they're doing to represent their brands, they're then home doing their performances. So their backgrounds actually also for a lot of them started in retail. Many people that you meet in this industry that are continuing in any side of this side of music business, whether it's from a manufacturer line or from a music retail line, they all started almost as the same as I did, as a college job that you started, and you kind of got some hands-on experience and you worked on kind of personality things. When it comes to running a business, like if you were to be going to school and thinking you're going to come out the other side and do this on your own, I mean, we were literally just talking things that would, things that benefit aren't so much theoretical courses. It's courses in accounting, it's courses in HR, it's courses in dealing with people. Some of the hardest things that we do more is kind of that customer service side. It's creating those environments where people want to come and work with you, and then navigating things like budgeting for large scale purchases, or kind of working through the ebb and flow of what business looks like. When you run retail like this, there are some super cold months where you're not getting people walking in and out, and learning how to do that. A lot of it is hands-on experience, and then as far as being in school and trying to think forward to what would benefit from that, it's learning accounting things, knowing how to do that side or understanding it better. It's learning how to do people skills. It's learning those backgrounds is
So
really what's important.
courses in economics and sociology would
Yes.
seem to fit into that line.
Would definitely. Another thing in terms of, I'm going to address the advertising part of this. So, one of the things that I did in the very beginning when I got the store, I hired a guy who wrote for us. There were two people that we did that really worked out very well for us. So the one gentleman was a really good businessman in terms of words. I'll never forget it. My first meeting was in a Starbucks in Manhattan. So he put things, that was around the Marsha Padelson thing as well. He was putting whole things together. Some of our blurbs on our materials came from him. He did a wonderful job with it. Graphic artists. You don't think about graphic artists, but here it is. So we wanted to, I needed to have a logo that popped, but didn't look like rock and roll and didn't look just like classical, but had royalty to it. So I was turned on to this gentleman by my attorney, and he came out with what's on our business card, and basically what it is, it's showing an old school logo, but using purple lettering, which is royalty. So it's saying two different things, that you can trust this person, it's royalty, and that kind of a concept just from a business card. What I didn't know is the gentleman that did this for us was the guy that created the logo that you see on a CD for Sony.
Huh?
That little logo,
Yeah.
he
He
created
did
that for
Yeah.
Sony.
Yeah.
He worked for them. Two guys were on a golf course. And that's how that happened. So there.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he knew what I wanted. He knew that it was a new age, but he also knew that what made this valuable. Why was this important for us? And because it adds value, it's important.
Right. So obviously computer skills, graphic skills, all of these things outside of the music department are so essential. So, every college, every university offers courses as electives. So if a music major is watching this, those electives should be geared to something that could be tangentially related to the industry. And obviously, graphic arts and any economics course.
Oh, yes.
And of course, let's not forget about courses in investing, because it's not about just making the money, it's about saving the money.
Right.
This sounds like a Seinfeld thing. You have to save the money, something like
Right.
that. Sort of like you have to save the plane ticket or the reservation or something like that. But anyway, so now what we didn't mention directly is the effect of online ordering and online purchasing as it's affected the retail music industry today directly. So you've lived through those changes. How have you guys been able to integrate both online stuff as well as hands-on in-person work?
Well, I'm going to let Crystal deal with part of this, which we were just talking about earlier today. When the online thing started, okay, especially in the music industry, the first big one was woodwind and brass. So that attracted people. The prices were very low.
Yes.
It was a thing. When I was involved with Wiener Music, we actually had a logo that we kind of took from Crazy Eddie. Okay, for those of you who
Which
would
is not
remember,
not me.
and it was, but
Tell them what Crazy Eddie is, because a lot of people don't remember
so
that.
Crazy Eddie owned well, not record stores, but audio equipment stores. And he would do these commercials, and he says, "Our prices are so low, they're crazy."
Crazy, right.
So we actually took that logo and put it on our woodwind catalog.
Right.
So we did it as a goof, but it was still in the infancy of this online program. Okay, and to where we got into the point to where people were trying mouthpieces online, so you were able to do that. Where instruments, all of this stuff was working, but then what happened after that? You were still dealing with a music store. You weren't dealing with a big conglomerate. You were dealing still with a music store. Nowadays, the thing that has come up for us is that people can go online and we'll take one of the largest ones that everybody knows of, and we'll mention it. It's certainly Amazon. And what happens is mom's buying 5 different things for the house from Amazon and asks her child, "Do you need reeds?" And the child said, "Yeah, I need a couple of boxes of reeds." Okay, and they add that to the order. So now this order is being fulfilled by not a music store, but just by a warehouse. And that ability has now taken the family and the student not coming into a music store, because now he can even get his reeds through a location that's not even a music store.
Right. And one thing we want to show on this is the new way you store reeds here, which Amazon absolutely doesn't do, where the reeds that come into the store are stored, are put into a humidity and temperature controlled environment, so that the reeds are more stable when you get them. Whereas the reeds in Amazon, they're stored in a warehouse, and it could be 50 degrees, it could be 100 degrees, and they're thrown in a truck, and you're going to get these reeds, and they're not going to last as long, and the chances of them playing as well as reeds that have been stored properly before they're sent out will be. And so I mean, these are the things that you guys do that people don't think about. And also about the instruments. They buy an instrument online, let's say from Amazon or from like you say, a larger corporation. Well, your instruments are also temperature and humidity controlled in a special cabinet. So when people are trying them, these instruments are more stable. They're not going to crack as easily, especially a wooden instrument that tends to crack if they're being shipped. So, I mean, these are sort of little things that's important when you're purchasing stuff that's costly. And reeds today are not the reeds of 50 years ago. You're going to pay 25, 30, $35 a box for 10 clarinet reeds or 10 saxophone reeds. Whereas years ago, and when I
Yep.
started out, $10 I'd get 10 reeds. I think it was even $5 when I started. That's how old I am. But I mean, so I mean, you're spending basically, $3, $3 to $4 a reed, and you, seven, eight, nine of the reeds don't play. That's not a good investment. But reeds that are stored properly and cared for properly, maybe you're going to get three or four. You're going to double the amount. So you may save $1 or $2 by buying it online, but ultimately you're losing money in the long run. So again, having a retail music store in your town, that one that is run by professionals and know how to deal with the equipment and respect the equipment as well as the consumer, you can't pay enough money for that. That's something that's, again, not necessarily understood. But I think it's important that we bring that up. So having been through this huge transition in your career, John, especially over these last 45 years, what do you foresee, or can you look ahead to in what's coming down the pike in the retail music industry? What do you foresee as possible changes, if that's possible even to foresee?
It's going to be it's going to be difficult in the sense of, because obviously so much in the music industry has been made overseas. Okay, the days, and not to get into the names of the different companies, but where they were handmade in the United States, but then they monetarily could not survive that way. So obviously they had to find another way of producing the instruments less expensive. Some have done it more successfully than others, but that's where I my concern is, in our industry, music is always, in a certain respect, a second class citizen where we're talking with an education. It depends on the district you go to in terms of how well they're putting together a program, or how not well they're doing a program. So, and for people like, especially with what Crystal and I do, we're we're counting on those districts to have a great music program, because we're in a position to help. We feel this is a team effort. But if that starts to get taken away with, lack of funds and things of that nature, then it becomes much more difficult. And that's where we're seeing things now, because Crystal and I participate in the bidding process of instruments. And with the climate that is out there now, we have to be careful as to what's going to happen. We'd love to have a crystal ball, no pun intended, but to see where we're going with this. When the pandemic hit us, okay, it was very interesting, because what it and I what Crystal did during the pandemic was pretty much miraculous, because during the pandemic, schools they got funds. All of a sudden, the gates opened up with funds. The problem was there were no instruments, because ships were not bringing them from overseas, because nothing was happening like that. And the way she handled it, and yes, at times we did overbuy things, but we overbought things that we know would eventually sell. But that was an extraordinary thing. Now we're in a different spot now, where it's the how little can you make to sell an instrument to a school that's going to make it worth to be able to do that. So that's the tightrope walk that we're doing, and we'll let you continue, because you're on the front line every day with all of that.
No, I think it's going to be an interesting couple years to watch now. Jonathan is, correct in his statements. There are very few instruments and accessories that we make here in the States, and so regardless of where we're importing them from, and we also import a fair amount from Europe, which is also being affected by all of this. we're seeing a very expensive hobby for some to now become even more expensive. And it is going to be difficult for schools and for students to kind of get their foot in the door with some of these instruments, because it's going to be so much exponentially more expensive. I mean, we referred earlier jokingly that, an R13 clarinet when you first started out was about $700. And when I bought mine in the early 2000s, it was about $2,000. And our new price books that we're looking at now, that same instrument, you could be looking at $4,500, $5,000. And when we're talking about something that is an industry standard, and this is only just one example, that is something, an educational tool that a student needs to continue on their journey, that may not be something that a family can afford. And you may find less musicians, not only being able to afford it, but you just may find less musicians if they can't afford these types of things, which is why the rental and stuff becomes important again. All of these rental instruments that we have been working with over the years, or the schools have been working with over the years, that may be our life raft for a while. Instead of having students that can own their first instruments, they may be renting for longer, and making smaller investments.
Interesting. Yeah, that all makes sense. And for those who think, well, why don't we just build factories here and we'll figure out a way to build an instrument factory and to have the workers trained who can do that, we're talking about
Years,
4 or 5 years minimum.
Years.
I mean, in the best scenario. So it's not something that's going to change overnight. And you just have to hope that the communities will support a music program, and that the communities will continue to support football programs, because football
Without a
programs
doubt.
give us marching bands.
Yep.
Marching bands gives us a music program. And that's the way it's come down. I mean, it's an unfortunate way that American culture now views music, but if it has to be in that way as a supportive tool to the football program, so be it. Certainly in the Southwest, the South, and the West, marching bands of a few hundred, that's common. Up here in the East Coast, not that common. No. So maybe we need to support some marching bands, get them going so we can keep our music departments going. But nonetheless, I wanted to thank both of you so much for taking time here on a Sunday, your off day, for coming in and doing this with us. But I hope it'll be helpful to the listeners and to those musicians out there who watch, who may have kids or nieces and nephews and so forth, giving them some insight. And for the young players, collegiate players, high school players who tune in, just maybe some food for thought about maybe this is a career that could work for me, in addition to trying to be as good a performer as I can be.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
without a doubt. Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for watching, and we hope you'll come back and watch further interviews on JoffyWoodwinds.com. Thank you.